Christopher Johnson McCandless travels to Alaska's Denali National Park and Preserve in April 1992 and arrives in the isolated region of Healy. He finds it so hard to get a ride and picks up a new book on local flora and fauna. The man who drops Chris off gives him gumboots and his number because he sees how unprepared Chris is and asks him to ping him back if he ends up alive. From there, he walks into the wild all alone. He finds a place for shelter. A city bus that Chris refers to as the Magic Bus is abandoned and used as a makeshift camp. He enjoys the solitude, the splendor of nature, and the adventure of living off the land. As he prepares for his new existence in the wild, he hunts with a 22 caliber rifle, reads literatures, and writes a notebook. Chris earned a high honors diploma from Emory University in May 1990. His parents throw him a graduation celebration at a hotel. Chris has a college fund of $24,500 and 68 cents. They say they'll give him a new car as a graduation present to replace his junker. He becomes enraged and admits that his junker is still functional and that he does not require a replacement. To experience living in the woods, Chris burns his credit cards and identity, gives his savings to Oxfam America, and embarks on a cross country drive in his Datsun 210. Chris' car is submerged in the flash flood at Lake Mead. He takes away the number plate of his car and burns the remnant amount he had. He abandons it and starts traveling. He wakes up in the Lake Mead, Arizona in July 1990, takes the alias Alexander Supertramp, and dumps his car's number plate in the dumpster. Chris' final grade reports, which were mostly A's, had been mailed to his parents by Emory University. His parents start to worry more and more about this. He didn't have a phone, so his parents drove all the way to Atlanta to surprise him. However, they weren't aware that he had left the rental house 2 months prior. All of the letters to Chris have been returned to them by the post office in a bundle. He leaves without telling his parents or his sister, Karen, what he's doing or where he's going, and he doesn't get in touch with them again. He travels to the Pacific Crest Trail in Northern California in August 1990. There he meets the bohemian couple, Jane and Rainey. He notices the distance between them. Chris and Karen were forced to watch the violence that occurred between his father, Walt McCandless, and his mother, Billy McCandless, when they were young. Their parents drew them together to choose one of them to live with us, part of their divorce plan. Fortunately, the divorce did not occur, but the conflicts continued. Rainey informs him that his relationship with Jane is deteriorating and Chris assists in rekindling it. Then Chris abandons them before they wake up in the morning. In early September, his parents receive a call from Annandale police informing them about Chris' abandoned car, which leads them to the conclusion that Chris was acting in order to avoid being found. Chris moves to Carthage, South Dakota on September 10, 1990 to work for Wayne Westerberg's contract harvesting business. As Wayne advised, Chris, on the other side, talks with Kevin about how to survive and live in the wilderness, as well as the vital items that must be retained. After Westerberg is taken into custody for satellite piracy, he departs. To find him, they engaged a private investigator. Chris spent the summer after graduation driving across the country, where he visited some of their family buddies in California and learned something about his father, Walt. Walt was already legally married to someone else. He had another son with his first wife, Marcia, even after Chris was born. He became unhappy with modern society after realizing that he and his sister Karen were born outside of marriage. As a result, the fact redefined Chris and Karen as retarded children. And Billy, to the young mistress, shame and embarrassment became his accomplice in deception. Chris saw their phony marriage and Walt's denial of another son as a murder of everyday truth. Those insights sank to the core of Chris' identity. They fabricated his entire childhood. Chris never informed them of his knowledge. Despite park authorities' warnings that Chris cannot kayak down the Colorado River without a license, he ignores them. On the way, he comes across Sonia and Max relaxing by the river. When Max asks Chris where he is going, he claims he has no idea. So Max recommends that Chris kayak along the specified route to reach Mexico. Chris continues in this manner. He decides to call the family instead, and out of compassion, Chris turns over his penny to the needy old man who was on the phone with his loved one. Chris was being driven by something other than the revolt or rage. He is apprehended by the authorities and is being investigated for illegally crossing borders. Chris explains that he spent 36 days in a cave and entered Mexico via a spillway at Morelos Dam. He claims to have ferried his kayak across the desert and got a ride to Gulfo, and he admits that he returned to the United States on foot after losing his kayak in the dust storm. He then boards a train carrying goods bound for Los Angeles after failing to find a ride. But shortly after arriving, he feels corrupted by contemporary society and departs. After being apprehended and assaulted by railway police for violating the law, he is forced to resume hitchhiking. Chris has been missing for almost a year. His parents' rage, desperation, and guilt began to give way to suffering. The anguish seemed to draw them closer together. Their expressions had also changed. When Billy sees a stray, she convinces herself that it's Chris, her son. When Chris lands at Slab City in the Imperial Valley on December 18, 1991, he runs to Jane and Rainey once more. He also meets Tracy Tatro, a young woman. Jane discusses her past, revealing that she became pregnant when she was very young, believing that the baby would bring them peace, but her spouse abandoned her, and she was left to raise her son Reno on her own. Then she met Rainey, which was wonderful for a while. Reno was a teenager at the time and he was on his way to becoming his own man. And she hasn't heard from him in 2 years, as she claims. She has no idea where he is right now. Tracy expresses interest in him, but he declines to date her since she is underage. After the holidays, Chris keeps traveling in the direction of Alaska. 1 month later, Chris is in Salton City, California. Ron Franz, an ex army man, encounters Chris while they are camping close to Salton City. He is a retired widower who lost his family in a vehicle accident when he was serving in the US Army. He works with leathers and lives alone in the workshop. Chris creates a belt outlining his strips, also thanks to Franz's leatherworking instruction. Chris chooses to leave France after spending 2 months with him. Franz provides him with his old camping and traveling supplies and offers to adopt Chris as his grandson. Chris advises him to bring it up once he gets back from Alaska. Chris manages to survive with the groceries that he discovered on the magic bus. Suddenly, Chris' life becomes more difficult at the abandoned bus 4 months later, and he makes several bad choices. He uses a rifle to kill a giant moose in an attempt to live off the land, but he is unable to preserve the meat, so it spoils quickly. He becomes aware of the harshness of nature as his provisions run out. Chris realizes that genuine enjoyment can only be had when it is shared with people, and he sets out from the wild to rejoin his family and friends. However, he discovers that the thaw has made the creek he crossed over the winter wide deep and turbulent, and he is unable to cross. He retreats to the bus after losing. Chris gathers and consumes plants and roots out of the desperation. He consumes a toxic plant after mistaking it for a similar one and getting sick as a result. As he slowly deteriorates, he keeps a journal of his self realization journey and ponders to get back to his family. He says goodbye to everyone and then climbs into his sleeping bag to pass away.